Over a year ago, I made this video. And since then, I've continued to use italki along with other resources, and I've learned a lot. Not just language, but more importantly, how to get more out of my language study, especially for under-resourced or poorly resourced languages. So if you've ever found yourself wanting to throw a poorly written textbook across the room, or frustrated with the Bird app because of its lack of grammar explanations and weird AI voices, or just annoyed by being in a classroom and having to listen to 4 times as many learners as teachers, butchering the language that you're trying to learn, this is for you. This is a sponsored video, but it won't just be an ad. I'm going to talk about how to get the most out of any language exchange or tutors. italki is just what I use. So this video is going to be about what I got out of italki, what I learned about language learning and myself, and what you can do to learn a language more effectively and efficiently. If you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Taylor Jones. I've got a PhD in linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania, and I love learning languages, not just analyzing them. That's not a given for linguists. If you know, you know. Today we're talking italki. We talkie, italki. This is Language Jones. Today's video is sponsored by italki. What did you expect? If you haven't heard of them, they're an online platform that pairs language learners with native level coaches and teachers across over 150 languages. That's one of the huge selling points for me that I'll come back to in a minute. But there are real live, actual people you can talk to who speak the language you're learning and who you can ask questions of. So instead of trying to learn Zulu from Learn Zulu and being unable to hear the tones, or from Duolingo and being unable to understand the grammar, you can supplement or replace those with, actual Zulu speakers, or Yiddish, Yoruba, Yakut, Yucatan Maya, and we're only in the tail end of the alphabet here. They have their own video conferencing platform with whiteboard and notes and a chat and everything you could possibly want. You can schedule lessons whenever. And you can do everything you would do on a desktop from their app, including selecting teachers by language and time. It's personalized one-on-one lessons, not to mention they've added a ton of AI tools, including ones that automatically record, transcribe, and organize your learning and make flashcards and quizzes for you. If you're interested in starting with italki, click my link in the description, or use my code JONES2025 to get $5 for free when you buy $10. For some languages, that's like 3-hour-long lessons right there. Now that you know what italki is, let's get back to the video. I've been using italki since early 2023, which is absolutely silly because I actually downloaded the app in 2013. But in 2013, the idea of joining a video conference with a stranger was weirdly terrifying to me. After 2020, not so much. Honestly, by June of 2020, I would have video conferenced to anybody. I'll admit that I haven't used it as much as I would have liked because, well, fatherhood can be difficult, and when I do finally have the time to study, I'm pretty exhausted. But I've explored the platform, I've used it for more languages than I should have, and I've also found a handful of teachers I really click with and keep coming back to. So I'm assuming you're already on board with this kind of language exchange, but I realize maybe I should explain the benefits for those of you on the fence, especially since unstructured conversations with strangers in your target language can sound terrifying. It doesn't have to be italki, but they're who I use, and I actually used italki before they sponsored me. So first, it's not generally totally unstructured. Every teacher I've had has their own lesson plans or texts to use, at least as a starting point. And it's totally possible to just take whatever you're using and just work through it with a guide rather than alone. Second, there's benefits to talking with actual people, which I'll explain. And then there's what I've learned are better ways to go about doing so that maximize what you learn in the time you have. And that's the plan for the rest of the video. Now, if you watch my channel, you've heard me talk about this before, but there's something about talking to another actual person that is so much more effective than anything else. I'm not saying that podcasts or media in your target language isn't incredibly helpful. It is. And I've even used AI conversation partners in the past. Qu'est-ce que vous me recommandez comme vin? But there's something fundamentally different about talking to an actual human who is listening to you and having an actual conversation. We're social mammals and we are wired for that. Now, whether it's mirror neurons or some sort of social patterning in the brain that gets activated or whatever is well above my pay grade. I am not a neuroscientist. I just do language variation and change and sociophonetics. But it is well established that our brains react differently to real people than to other forms of media. Children with unlimited exposure to television and radio do not develop as quickly, linguistically, as children exposed to the same amount of speech, but from real people. And if you plop them in front of children's television in another language, they don't learn to speak the language to any meaningful degree. Here's looking at you, Muzzy. It's about human interaction. Not just interaction, human interaction. I'm not knocking AI conversation partners, at least not in principle. I get the idea of wanting to rehearse unstructured conversation without the pressure of talking to a real person. But that talking to a real person is precisely what actually helps you grow and learn. Not to mention, people are sometimes better about correcting you. I mentioned in my video from 2023 that I forgot the word for soon in Hebrew in a lesson, and when I was reminded of it, it clicked in a way that I knew I would never forget it. You don't get that from anything other than interaction with a real person. It's bekarov, by the way, which can be literally translated to in nearby, because languages love using spatial metaphors for time concepts. Before in English is literally just in front of. Fun fact, soon literally comes from a Proto-Indo-European word that means this. Temporal deixis is just spatial deixis all the way down. Now, we should definitely focus on speaking with real people to light up our brains in a way that contributes to long-term memory formation. But this isn't to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. I definitely think engaging with media is an important part of language learning. It's just that real people are best for our wiring, followed by real people digitally mediated, followed by recordings, and so on. And there's not enough research on AI yet to determine if it can have a similar effect. My personal prediction is that we will find that it is not as good, but that's an empirical question, and I await somebody with a grant actually finding out. Someone who doesn't work for an AI tutoring software company. So italki is one way that you can talk with real people. It's not generally a structured course like signing up for a class somewhere. And that means you're freed up to actually ask questions and direct your learning. Are the pronouns generally used or not used in the past? Like I'd say like lakach gadim abaita or... This is gold, especially for self-motivated students. This is why I use italki, and it's why it's worth the cost for every lesson. Now, you're not always or often guaranteed that people will understand your questions. The only time I get that is when I'm talking to trained linguists. But you can basically elicit either data or answers to your questions if you're persistent enough. This is my main takeaway for this video. When you have real people, you're paying for their time, be insistent on getting your questions answered. And where it really shines is on under-resourced languages. I thought I was going to sit down with the Routledge Colloquial Levantine Arabic and just bang out finally learning Arabic after a few months. If anything, I'm more confused than I was when I started. The textbook was terrible, and the entire process was demoralizing, even with all the helpful comments from people who watched me live stream learning. Let me know if you're all interested in more of those live streams, by the way. I might be able to do that in this coming year. Instead, I could have just found somebody on italki who speaks Levantine Arabic and actually gotten somewhere in that time. Although, I don't think I could have streamed the study process. Side note, if you are learning Levantine Arabic, I just got back from the Linguistic Society of America annual meeting, where I spoke with a friend who works for Georgetown University Press. And perhaps, unsurprisingly, the most effective standard is still Al-Kitab Vitalam al-Arabiya, Volume 3, which has Levantine and other dialects, accents, regional varieties, whatever you want to call them. So if I ever get back to it, I'll be using that textbook and a ton of italki. The reason it wins out is that it just gives you a structured course with the basics, not every variation of a pronoun with every regional accent and no clue which one you should memorize in order to, actually speak to people. Sociolinguists are sometimes the worst. As another aside, my motivation for learning Arabic and Hebrew took a hit in 2024 for obvious reasons if you're paying attention to world events. I honestly wish I'd just stuck with it. What I will say is that the kind of people who are in the language learning and language exchange sphere are all so supportive and kind that it gives me hope when the news is making me feel hopeless. We're all people just trying to get by, and I hope that we can build bridges through language and cultural exchange and food, and through actually talking to people. Lots of people just want to coexist in peace, and I am blessed that somehow that was most of the comments in my live streams. So all of that said, here's what I would really suggest for getting the most out of italki, or similar. First, shop around. Try a few different teachers and find one you like and really resonate with. Lately, I've been studying a lot with Pazit, whose schedule tends to line up with mine, and I'm having a blast. I can ask her all sorts of weird questions. In the last session, we worked on the slangiest, most contemporary, least textbook, most insider baseball way to say, I don't speak Hebrew well. Current winner is העברית שלי על הפרצוף, אבל בא לי לשפר אותה. Let me know if you can do even slangier. That brings me to my second point. Take advantage of the unstructured format. You can ask questions. You're not wasting anybody's time. If you don't understand the answer, you're not going to have a room full of other students annoyed at you for asking follow-up questions. This can be uncomfortable if you're not making yourself understood, but honestly, stick with it. I had a few minutes where I was certain I wasn't making myself understood, and I was probably annoying my teacher because I kept trying to get clarity around verbs of quotation and time referent. In Hebrew, unlike English, you actually kind of mentally place yourself at the time of speaking when quoting indirectly. So I might say in English, I said to myself, I should have been there. But in Hebrew, it's the equivalent of, I said to myself, I should be there. It took a few minutes to really nail that down. and that's fine. I'm certain linguists are super annoying to people because nobody else is going to be systematically asking about tense marking and reported speech or relative clauses or irrealis modality or whatever. It seems like it's a bunch of extremely technical and unrelated questions, but we're usually laser focused on one typological question there. I strongly recommend reading a reference grammar or a learner's grammar of whatever you're learning, and then as things come up, you can recognize enough to know what kinds of patterns a sentence fits into and ask intelligent questions to be sure to actually learn the deeper rule or generalization, or honestly, worldview and perspective. Another thing you can do and should do is ask for repetition. With an app or a recording, you can only get one kind of repetition. With a person, you'll almost invariably get slower, more careful speech. This was the whole principle behind Bill Lebove's department store study. But the idea is that you'll learn more about the phonotactics of the language and the difference between careful and casual speech that way. So again, my main takeaway is basically just don't be afraid to treat it like a field methods class where you're trying to elicit data that will answer the questions that you have. Of course, you can always just focus on the social and practice conversations. You can even practice my recommendation for improving conversations from last week, where you ask relevant questions and practice active listening. And if you really don't click with your teacher, you can just hang up. I know it sounds harsh, but it's your time. So looking back on a year of italki in 2024, if I could go back and do it again, what would I do differently? I'd make two changes. First, I would have just been more consistent with one language. I get sucked in and I'm interested in so many things that I flit about a bit. I did a 3-month Persian challenge at the beginning of last year, and I focused heavily on reading a textbook and memorizing the content. Looking back, I should have just had 2 or 3 sessions a week with a teacher like Johnny, even if we were going to go over that textbook. Having a single language to focus on with consistency rather than lessons whenever I could squeeze one in whatever looked interesting, would have been better for me as a speaker. As a linguist, I'm actually benefiting from my sampler platter approach, but I'm definitely not speaking Persian as well as I could, and don't get me started on Moroccan Arabic. It's so cool, but I just can't justify spending the time on it right now. If you can, know that I'm jealous, and please enjoy. I'm trying to live vicariously through you. And as a corollary to that, I look at how I spent my time, and I wasted a lot of time planning on finishing all of Duolingo or dumping all the vocabulary from a textbook like the Routledge Colloquial textbook into Anki, and not actually doing it. And I told myself that I would do that before I spoke with people. That was the wrong plan, and I wasted my time in a holding pattern. I would have been better served by more lessons rather than giving myself an assignment to complete before I speak to anybody. Don't be like me. Second is just to actually dump it all into Anki or some other spaced repetition system to really lock in what I learned. italki has a chat function that teachers make extensive use of, but I'm bad about going back consistently and memorizing everything. By the way, leave me a comment if you want a video on how to make the most of Anki, and maybe that will motivate me to level up my Anki game so I can level up yours and we can all improve together. So looking back on a year of italki, I'm grateful for all the teachers I worked with. Shout out to Pazit, Omer and Barak in Hebrew, as well as Shabnam, Johnny and Haleh in Farsi, and Lambert in Quebec French. I know that I will definitely be doing more of italki in 2025. If you want to, of course, click my link in description or use my code Jones2025. Leave me a comment with what you'll be studying. For me, it's definitely Hebrew, probably Persian, and French as always. Who knows what else? Until next time, happy learning.